Today I'm going to be discussing Bill of Billabong. Right, this was published in 1931 and it marks a bit of a change of direction because she introduces a new recurring character, and I think that's an excellent idea. The Billabong Quartet have basically grown up, so she introduces Bill, who's a child, which is a really neat way of reinvigorating the series. So, what happens in Bill of Billabong? So it starts with Jim fixing some barbed wire and Murty's in the background nagging him and telling him how sad and serious he and Mr. Linden have become since Nora and Wally left to live in their own house. And they get back to Billabong, and various other people say the same thing to them. Nora and Wally are living at Little Billabong, which is only a couple of kilometres away, but it's so the heart has gone out of the house. Right, at that point, Mr. Linden gets a letter from an old friend asking if he can babysit Percival Blake, who's a small, obnoxious boy. Mr. Linden agrees, of course. And Bill arrives on the scene. Percival arrives on the scene. He's a little red-headed, stocky kid with a bad attitude. And it turns out that his partner is so sad and miserable because he hates his red hair, so he tries to dye it brown, and in shades of Anne of Green Gable it turns green, won't come out, but everybody treats him so well, and Nora gives him a haircut, and they're all very sensible. Nobody laughs at him, and then he reveals that he hates being called Percival, and they decide that they'll call him Bill, which actually I think is a terrible decision because this is a television series set at a book series set at Billabong with recurring characters already called Billy, the stockworker, the Aboriginal stockworker, and Bob, and it's at a place called Billabong, and now we have another Bill. So I think that's a bad decision, but that's what they call him, and it makes him happy, and he's completely completely changes his personality, becomes a lovely little kid. Acquired some extra land up in the hills, some rough land where they can run cattle, because they think they need a bit more of a challenge now that they're all on the station together. They go up into the hills with Bob and Tommy as well, and while they're there, Bill wanders off, and there's a landslide, and he gets sort of trapped in a different gully to the one that he was in, and while he is there, he finds Fossica's wife and children, Mrs. Walker and her kids. They're waiting for Mr. Walker to come back from town with food supplies, and they've got virtually nothing left, and Mrs. Walker's hurt her leg. So Bill can't leave them, and he kind of rescues them and helps them, but the others can't find Bill, and it's all looking very bleak, especially after one of the small children accidentally destroys what's left of the Walker's stores, so now they've got no food at all, and they're just stuck there. But then Nora has a vision which shows her a tree near the place where there was the landslide, and Jim and Wally and Nora go through and they find Bill and the Walkers and they rescue all of them, so it has a happy ending. And now we've got the theme of a child lost in the bush. The text says, "There were children, the stories were legion of children, some found in time, not all, and the marvel always how they wandered so far, often crossing terrible country." And it is the great recurring theme of Australian literature. You can see it in as early as the 1860s with the ballads about the Daly children who were missing for 11 days. Lawson wrote about it, as did Patterson, great poems in the 1890s. And, of course, there's the whole Heidelberg School of Art. Frederick McCubbin did his most famous picture, which is called Lost, in 1886. And then he painted variations later on. Here's one from 1903. It's still a theme that you see in recurring in the news all the time. Children get lost, people look for them, sometimes they find them, sometimes they don't, because the bush is vast and inhospitable, and people do just disappear into it. rescue time. Bill obviously is completely rehabilitated from the grumpy little kid that he was. And as a minor note, they shuffle Billy the stock worker off screen by saying he's a broken leg, because otherwise he's such a good tracker, he'd be able to find Bill, you see. And while he's off in hospital at Kanji, Murty brings him some tools so he can carve some tomahawks and boomerangs. So that's a kind deed by Murty. Bill obviously rescues the Walkers, because when he arrives, Mrs. Walker can hardly move, and he helps her and makes her a crutch out of a tree and helps out. And Nora's vision allows all of them, the Walkers and Bill, to be rescued, because they were completely out of supplies and really in big trouble in the vast and inhospitable bush. It's not described as a very pleasant place in the Walker camp. I just wanted to talk a bit about Mary Grant Bruce and spirituality, or religion. She doesn't make a big parade of her beliefs, but she did come to have some deeply held spiritual beliefs, especially in her later years after the death of her son Patrick. So, in the Billabong books, you don't ever see the Lintons in church, although that's not as surprising as, say, Little Women, where you never see them in church, even though they're the daughters of a parson. But it is implied that they do occasionally go to church. There's a line when they're in Ireland where they mention that a little boy can see them in their uniform in church on Sunday, and in Captain Jim, they're coming back from the church at the end of the book. And apparently there's a minister who knows them well enough, who's known them all their life, who marries them, but in the drawing room at Billabong. But you never actually see them go to church. However, in Bill of Billabong, you do have Nora having her vision that allows her to find Bill. And she has similar visions in some of the later books. In Billabong Riders, for instance, she finds Wally because of a message. She says in that book, in Riders, "I think the air is full of radio messages," she told herself. "Perhaps it was one that sent me here." And in Bill of Billabong, she says, "I don't believe dreams are sent for nothing. I believe they're sometimes given." So during the war, she did quite a lot of broadcasts on what she called thought power, which I think we'd call positive thinking, deep breathing, and visualization. I'll read a little bit of a letter that she wrote to one of her cousins in 1935. Right. "For years we have studied the power of thought, steadily held to help in illness. And we know how real it is. The guild of healing to which we belong works together by mental means, thought and prayer, for cases sent to it. And the cures that I could tell you about are more like miracles than anything else. We look on thought as a kind of wireless, and we know where there is love and sympathy and faith, that wireless goes straight to its object. I feel you can believe this. Anyway, because you know I will love you. Will you try to remember that especially twice a day at 7:30 a.m. and 9:30 p.m. I am thinking steadily of you, picturing you happy and peaceful, with rays of vitality and health pouring into you, building up new health and harmony in all your being, and we relax and feel receptive." And in some of her other non-Billabong books, in the 1930s especially, there's almost what you'd call a strand of mysticism. In Circus Ring, which was, I think, 36. This is a really nice 1950s copy with the cover still. There's a healer with sort of magic fingers who can soothe pain away. And in Peter and Co., which is 1940, again, there's a sort of a masseuse with magic hands that can heal where regular doctors can't. And Seahawk, whoa, I'm really bad at putting them in the middle of the screen. Seahawk, which is 34, I think. 34. They have, the protagonists are two teenagers who have a bit of a conversation about how they think the area that they're in, the little islands, might have been made by one of God's helpers, and he's out there sort of helping them, which is useful because then they're able to catch the drug smugglers that are nearby. So all works out. Bruce is not what you think of as a spiritual writer. She's certainly not one of those writers who clearly existed specifically for the Sunday school market, but she had deeply held beliefs which had evolved over time, particularly after the death of her son, and it certainly reflected in her writing. Okay. I'd like to say that Bill of Billabong reminds me once again of the close link between Mary Grant Bruce and John Marsden, the later Australian children's author who wrote Tomorrow When the War Began in the 90s, and the Ellie Linton Chronicles in the early 2000s. In his series, they the main characters, a while into the series, encounter a small group of feral kids who are sort of living wild, and they adopt one of them called Gavin, who's a short, stocky, kind of stubborn, obnoxious kid, but who Ellie and Homer become very close to, and he fairly much is fairly much identical in character to and role in the novels to Bill. They give the older characters someone to parent and to take care of, to teach. Overview of Bill of Billabong. Okay, it's a good book. It's an excellent idea to introduce Bill because it really revives the series now that all of the characters are adults. And it's one of my favourites. It's beautiful descriptions of the Australian bush, with the exception of the terrifying, horrible valley where the walkers are living in their impoverished camp. So overall, number 10 in the series, it's excellent.